time to start the next session. So I would just ask you to sit down and focus on the next talk. It will be given by Bernhard Preim from University of Magdeburg, and he's the biggest expert in medical visualization. So we are very, very looking forward for his talk. Thank you, Bernhard, that you joined us today. And whenever you are ready, which I think you are ready already, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bara, for this very kind introduction. Yeah, indeed, I'm happy that I can contribute to this nice activity for the second time already. This summer school is really a good thing. Yeah, before I start, let me briefly say a few words on narrative medical visualization. I think that is really an important topic, a new topic where many contributions are needed, basically from all of you. There are many established areas in medical visualization like surface rendering and volume rendering, transfer functions, virtual endoscopy, vessel visualization, and so on. These are really mature. I would even say they are more or less saturated. It is hard to make contributions that are really much better than all the hundreds of papers that are already there. That's different with narrative medical visualization. I start here with a screenshot from a paper from Monique that appeared in August. That is the first paper on narrative medical visualization. So there's a lot to do. We see 4 slides of a story. So it's basically a slideshow with carefully prepared visualizations that were created with the help of a medical illustrator. Some of you may know her. It's Laura Gerrison, who got her PhD last week in Bergen for a very strong work. A linear structure is provided here. You see it in the top line a little bit that guides the viewer here through the story. Yeah, narrative visualization, according to the seminal paper from Siegel and Höhr, TVCG in 2010, employs stories, and stories are sequences of causally related events. This combines storytelling with interactive graphics, and it aims at broad audiences without a lot of experience in this area. So typically medical visualization aims at physicians, at experts in radiation treatment planning, or other medical experts. Here, in contrast, we aim at a broad audience. It is more about science communications. So we employ simplified visualizations, perhaps strongly smoothed. We have restricted interaction. So we avoid, for example, that people freely can rotate a 3D model where they easily get lost. We avoid also too complex language. So we avoid technical jargon and medical jargon. And we employ strategies and tactics that are from different areas and include journalism, theater, literature analysis, and film, cinematic techniques to create engaging stories. Yeah, to set the stage, I want to use a few quotations from a paper from Quan Liu Ma and a few others. Helwig Hauser was involved. That is one of the very few papers on narrative visualization and storytelling in scientific visualization. Good stories share some common characteristics. They take time to unfold, and their pacing matches the audience's ability to follow them. They hold the audience's attention by having interesting settings, plots, and characters. Yeah, that reminds a bit to theater. They leave a lasting impression by piquing the author's curiosity or by conveying a deeper meaning. All these 3 quotations indicate that we need to know our audience really very well. Why narrative visualization could be a good thing to do. And that is based on some understanding in cognitive science, which reveals that we have 2 types of memory. Yeah, semantic memory is used for the storage of unrelated facts. Yeah, here are just a few examples of cities and their relations to countries. The second type of memory is episodic memory, where sequences of causally related events are stored. These are stories. And cognitive science indicates that people tend to be much better at accessing episodic memory. Yeah. Therefore, it is a good idea to explain things by making them part of the story. There are certain narrative genres, yeah, and I use here an image that is recreated from the Siegel and Hare paper. They introduced 7 different narrative genres. I would say from today's point of view, I would add one more, and that is scrollytelling. I will show examples of this later, but basically these 7 are still quite valid. That does not mean that you need to decide for exactly one of them. You also could combine them. Yeah, a short video obviously could be part of a slideshow, or also a flowchart could be part of a slideshow. So imagine you want to create a story that explains a tumor disease, then a slideshow with a few animations that show tumor formation and tumor growth and how metastases are formed. That could be a good idea. There are many decisions that need to be taken. The first and maybe one of the most important is the narrative intent. What do we need, or what do we want to achieve with this story? And ideally, that is more than just informing the audience about a disease or treatment options. If people listen or read to something, it may be somehow interesting, but they may ask at the end, so what? Thus, there should be a consequence, a call to action, for example. Yeah, control your blood pressure in medicine. Or I briefly heard the discussion about master's colonoscopy. So there could be also a narrative intent to convince people to go to colonoscopy. Yeah, not enough people take this screening measure, or take part in vaccination, or improve your lifestyle, or donate money to a certain organization. That could be a narrative intent. Data journalists and illustrators tell and report that they spend a lot of effort to make a story relevant and hook the audience. So to start it somehow that attracts their attention. And typically they have different variants for this that they discuss with colleagues before making a final story. To select the material for the story, you need elementary pieces and facts for your argumentation, for reasoning about a disease, for example, or for an innovative piece of technology. You have specific data sources. And then narrative visualization often, not always, but often follows specific design patterns. Yeah, some of you are familiar with software design patterns. There are also interaction design patterns. And in the same line of thinking, Benjamin Bach and a number of colleagues, it was really a large effort, collected and validated 18 different narrative design patterns. Rhetoric questions, for example, is one of them. In the beginning, I have shown a few examples of Monique's patterns, of Monique's story, and all of these slides started with a rhetoric question. Yeah, then we need appropriate visualization techniques, and interpretation support is very important. Yeah, interpretation support can be realized by means of labels, arrows, captions. Sometimes I see scatter plots where there are 4 captions in the 4 different corners of the scatter plot, automatically derived with some kind of natural language generation. Narrative structure is important, so that means that the story elements are put in a certain sequence. They are also grouped somehow, and there are transition effects. In the literature on narrative visualization, there are many papers that describe different variances of sequencing and grouping, and also transition effects. Yeah, narrative structures are often linear. That means there is really a sequence from which you cannot deviate. In data videos, of course, that is all arranged on a time scale. Slideshows also have this linear structure typically, And scrolly telling, which is a nice combination of scrolling, vertical scrolling typically, and storytelling, also has a linear structure. But there are alternatives. For example, some authors use what they call an elastic structure. And an elastic structure combines a linear main path, one would say that's the backbone of the story, along with some optional side branches. So you are allowed, if you are interested, to deviate from this linear path and ask for more information on something, an explanation, for example, how the imaging device is working. And when you have seen this, you are automatically guided back to the main path. So that is still strongly guided, but you have a little bit more interaction. Another variant, and that was actually introduced in the initial Siegel and Herr paper, is the Martini glass structure, which I explain in a second. Here I use this example from Sarah Mitten and Zwei's work in our group. She used an elastic structure for her story. So here is the linear main path, the backbone, and then there are some points where you can go to an optional slide, and then you are automatically put back to the main path. Yeah. What is meant with a Martini glass structure? So the Martini glass is rotated in this way, and then it has a very narrow part here, and that indicates that in this part of the story, it is strictly linear. But at the end, you can explore it in different directions. So this resembles more the traditional explorative visualization. And the Martini glass structure is a combination of linear structure and exploration. Yeah, for grouping, different strategies and tactics could be used. They are often structured in acts according to the tension arc from Aristotle, so that's even quite old. It starts with an introduction, an opening where the characters and the conflict are introduced. So characters in medical visualization could be really a patient who has a severe disease, or a physician. Yeah. In other examples, it could be also the data. Yeah, that serves here as character. Then tension rises. Yeah. For example, it turns out that the symptoms get more severe. The patient is confronted with a severe diagnosis and has to think about a treatment that could be risky, that could involve severe side effects. Yeah, and then is a denouement stage where the conflict is resolved and the characters succeed. Yeah, the disease can be treated or fail. That can also happen. Yeah, what are some medical applications? What I described so far is quite abstract. So we could have as characters a patient, a physician, maybe also a nurse. The conflict could be a disease that has a strong effect on the life quality. And yeah, I mentioned already what could be an example of the peak and of the denouement. What are data-driven aspects here? Yeah, we are interested primarily in narrative visualization that really involves data. That could be statistics about the disease, about how often it occurs in different age groups, for example. 2D and 3D medical image data could be used to reveal the pathology, the location of the pathology, for example. Yeah, this nice workflow here, I would call it, from Bong-Shin Lee and others, also gives a little bit structure to the process of creating narrative visualizations. It starts with something that is more the traditional visualization, where we have data, we explore it, we need an expert to make sense of the data, and we have some findings, and some of them may be useful as story pieces for a story. Yeah. So here we have another person, probably this person doing the analysis here is not the same one as the one that connects the story pieces to a plot, yeah, orders them appropriately. Then there is an editor, so again, a different role to build the presentation, and perhaps a presenter, like I'm currently the presenter, that really uses the story in order to tell the story to an audience. There are different settings how narrative visualization can be used. Our interaction designer in the team always tells us most stories are perceived via mobile phones, yeah? So rather small display devices, but that should be considered because they are used so frequently. Tablets have a little bit larger display and give us a little bit more opportunities for visualization. Websites, of course, are used. Online journals, so we see really nice stories on the New York Times, for example, or on the Zeit. And a couple of them are related to medical topics. So I would say in practice, there is already narrative medical visualization, including data videos that you can see at some journals. But in science, we are a little bit behind. Yeah, there are no academic papers about narrative medical visualization. And the largest displays could be table-sized display, for example, in a science museum. It is a different situation when we have a narrator, yeah, a speaker, so to say, or whether we have asynchronous narration, something that you can download at every time you want and look at whatever time is convenient to you. Yeah, I try to give a few examples of narrative visualization related to scientific data. Here, for example, that is something in the San Francisco Science Museum. I took this image from the paper from Quan Liu Ma and others that I mentioned already as one of the few examples combining scientific visualization with storytelling. Most narrative visualizations are applied to tabular data with applications in business and finance. And a lot of work was done in order to automatically create annotated charts or automatically create data videos that explain developments of business or finance data. Very few examples are related to scientific data, for example, related to climate change. Yeah, it would be really beneficial to have more of such work. Climate change is relevant for many people, so there definitely is an audience, a broad audience that would be interested. So therefore, it is also beneficial to think about good strategies to communicate these data. Yeah, here is one of the few examples that I found. That is work from Michael Böttinger, and that is Michael Böttinger. So at the German Climate Research Center, they use a globe that they can employ to map data on climate simulations. So that's, I think, a very appropriate display device, especially for climate data. But that, of course, can only be used if you are in this research center or at an exhibition where they bring this globe with them. On a website, you would have a more traditional visualization, a mapping projection like you see it here. Some climate-related data mapped to the different parts of the globe. Yeah, and here are some examples that are more typical. Data visualizations enhanced with interpretation aids like this automatically computed average value and automatically computed and labeled maximum value. So here temperature distributions for 3 different sites are compared with each other. Here the basic message that should be conveyed is this linear correlation, this negative linear correlation between life expectancy and fertility rate. That means the more children a mother gives birth to, the lower is the life expectancy in these countries. Yeah, a correlation that does not tell you something about the causality. So whether the high life expectancy causes the low fertility rate or vice versa, that is not clear, but the correlation is quite obvious. Yeah, and again, there are different strategies employed in order to improve the interpretation. Some large countries are labeled here. Their flags are also shown, so that makes it easier to perceive them. The focus here is a little bit on the American countries. So therefore, there is a common background color. A shape is computed for all of them. So you see here the region where all these American countries are. Yeah, and also for them, the basic trend basically is achieved. Yeah, why narrative visualization could be a good idea for medical applications. I think there is a broad interest in medical problems. You could be interested in medical problems because you are affected by a medical problem. You could be interested because you are afraid of being affected later, or you know someone who is affected. Many people say that health is the most important thing in life. And therefore, there are many TV broadcasts or news articles about diagnosis, prevention, and treatment of frequent diseases, also about rehabilitation. So that is really something where you can expect broad interest. Patient education is, I would say, a little bit a special case. Because here you really have to explain things to a patient who is affected, who may be anxious, in an appropriate manner. Literature on patient education emphasizes that appropriate risk communication is important. If you get a drug prescribed and you read what is written along with this drug, you are afraid of what can happen. So many severe things. You don't want to take this drug. Yeah. These texts are designed in such a way that legal responsibility is avoided for the companies. That is not the necessary best text in the sense of narrative medical visualization. Let me give you a few examples of what could be narrative intents in medicine. So for example, a medical research institution wants to inform about their research activities and research focus, their achievements, and they want to do this in order to attract funding or in order to attract patients, because they earn money with patients, of course, or in order to attract participants, healthy participants in their studies. Yeah, we have cooperations partners that have exactly these goals. Yeah, so that is not just my imagination, but these are very real narrative intents. We are also involved in one grant application where the major goal is that patients are better informed before they chat with the physician. Yeah, the physicians spend a lot of time, at least in their perception, with explaining things to patients, and it would be better if a little bit of this time could be saved because there was narrative visualization before. Another narrative visualization intent could be to inform the audience about avoidable risk factors. Why avoidable risk factors? There are, of course, also non-avoidable risk factors, genetic factors. But if I tell people about their non-avoidable risk factors, what could they do about? Basically nothing. So therefore, it's much more interesting to tell them something about avoidable risk factors. Yeah, so perhaps they even want to change their lifestyle. Another narrative intent that goes in a little similar direction is that that the population is aware of early detection methods, like the colonoscopy, know and employ these techniques. So I really like this image here. That is a series of comics that were developed at the Charité in Berlin for patient preparation. Yeah, your symptoms suggest that narrowed segments of the coronary arteries reduce the blood supply to the heart muscle. That's what the patient is told. We will be able to find out if that's the case by performing cardiac catheterization. Yeah, this should explain to the patient the heart anatomy, the major coronary vessels. Yeah, a narrowing is illustrated, the different blood cells, of course, and further information. That is really used in practice, and you can also read about this because it is also assessed and evaluated in a scientific publication from Anna Brandt and colleagues. So she is a physician, but works together with a team of illustrators and others to help to create these and other comics for patient preparation. What else is already available? If you look in some journals like the Zeit in Germany, there are long stories about COVID-19. Yeah, these stories include interactive maps where you can select, for example, your region. That is also an important personalization strategy in narrative visualization. Yeah, you can select your region or your income or whatever affects you and can compare this with others. Patients like me is a website that's quite interesting. Yeah, so you can compare different regions. You get numbers like the incidence, the hospitalization rate, the stays at the intensive care unit, the mortality, that means the death rate, sometimes also the capacity of hospitals, yeah, so that it becomes clear how far we are away from overloading the healthcare system. There are timeline-based visualizations, annotations, for example, of peaks. Maybe it is also shown in these timeline-based visualizations when certain preventive measures were introduced, for example, when vaccination was available, when fast tests were available, and also how different variants of the virus have distributed over time. And these visualizations are integrated in comprehensive text, and the text provides the context in order to interpret the images. Yeah, and the strategies that are used here to convey information about COVID-19 basically could be also applied to other infectious diseases. For example, a strong wave of influenza. Yeah, just some examples, unfortunately in German, of course. Yeah, these are the map-based visualizations with a certain color scheme that had to be changed several times within the pandemics. You can select certain regions. You see how things developed over time. What is the trend? Yeah, and that all is part of a long story. Therefore, I mentioned the term storytelling here. Here, for example, you see 4 timelines over time, the mortality, hospitalization, and the number of infections. And you nicely see that the number of infections strongly went down here in February, March, and April, but the number of severe cases remained almost the same. Yeah, so that was a variant Omicron 4 that is highly infectious, but not so severe. Here you see which variant of the virus was dominant in different times of the pandemics. Yeah, what is the team that you need to create such narrative medical visualizations? You need artists, illustrators, yeah, medical artists that are really familiar with tools, that have a lot of experience to create narrative visualizations for a specific audience. For example, a company that sells drugs. Interaction designers are really valuable because they also are experienced in target audience analysis. They are also experienced in sketching and prototyping, so they create a lot of variants that can be compared. Yeah, Miro boards, for example, are tools that are frequently used by them, and they are also quite strong in designing and evaluation, user experience-based evaluation. You need, of course, also physicians, maybe even other healthcare providers like nurses or physiotherapists. And in our cooperation with physicians related to narrative visualization, we ask them primarily, how do you explain to a patient the symptoms, the disease, the prognosis, the treatment options? Yeah, so we don't need the physician so much with all his expert knowledge, but primarily his communication skills with patients and relatives as examples of how the physician communicates with a broad audience. Of course, like in other aspects of, or other areas of medical visualization, software developers are needed, people with background in graphics programming. It could be also useful to involve patients or representatives of patient groups and journalists would also be a valuable part of a team. Yeah, what is the approach in narrative medical visualization? You need to carefully discuss the narrative intent. What do you want to achieve? You select the data, facts, and story pieces. Probably in medical visualization, you need image data. So I can imagine that selected slices of CT and MRI data, carefully annotated, some regions are encircled, for example, that could be realized in such a way that it can be understood by broad audiences. Yeah, personalization is very important. Whenever I see something on TV related to health, then we have one patient or a few patients, but not too many, yeah, so that the audience really can build up a relation to this patient and is curious what happens to her. You select a certain narrative strategy. So for example, one of them is Campbell's hero journey. Yeah, the hero starts a journey. He has to leave his home. He has to have many adventures. He is challenged. He is in fighting situations, in dangerous situations. And at some point, that all was successful and he returns to his home region. Yeah, that's Campbell's hero journey. We used this as the basis and translated it to a patient hero journey. So in our story, the patient is the hero that finally overcomes his severe disease. The Freitags pyramid is something that's used in theater a lot. Actually, it's built on the tension arc from Aristoteles. Yeah, story structure is important. So we really think a lot about this, how to group things together and how to sequence it and to finally come up with a story. Another aspect that is important, maybe in medical visualizations even more than in others, we try to incorporate features that raise trust. Yeah. Otherwise, the audience may be skeptical. Yeah, they may think that a story just conveys the financial interest of somebody. So whatever we can do to raise trust, we integrate this. For example, we explain where the data is from. We explain which transformations have been applied to the data. Yeah, the provenance. We include logos of the scientific institutions that are involved in the research and in the story generation. We need many iterations. Yeah, it's really amazing how much time is needed to come up with a good story. We try to systematically compare the different variants. So that all is needed to come up with a good final result. Evaluations, of course, are important. And here I borrow from other areas of narrative visualization, how also narrative medical visualization can be evaluated. Of course, even if the major goal may go beyond informing the audience, it is interesting to understand what people have learned from exploring your story. What did they know before the story and what have they learned while using the story? Which visual components they remember. Yeah, there was in 2013, I think, a nice paper where memorability was considered a key criterion for good visualizations. Trust and confidence, we try to achieve a good trust, but we need to evaluate this, of course. Engagement, how can engagement be measured? I would say one measure is how long people spend with your story. So instead of making something where the users are as fast as possible, what you typically want to achieve, yeah, you measure task completion time and you are very satisfied if people can do a certain task, perform a certain task faster than before. Yeah, that is not the goal here. And we may even ask about their willingness to change their behavior with respect to certain behaviors that are more healthy. Yeah, so I really want to emphasize here that the classic criteria, for example, accuracy, rate of error, and task completion time are largely irrelevant. Yeah? Other criteria are needed. I want to use the last minutes to explain a little bit one of our case studies. and that is we want to inform the audience about the small vessel disease. That is a rather unknown but rather frequent neurologic disease. It affects small vessels, and that means vessels that are too small to be recognized in CT and MRI images. Yeah? Many of these small vessels are somehow blocked, and that leads to problems. It's actually a precursor typically of dementia. In addition to informing the audience, we also want to activate people in the sense that they should control their blood pressure. Yeah, untreated high blood pressure is the major risk factor for getting this disease. And for our collaboration partner, and I think that is quite typical, one of her goals is to recruit participants for her research, for her studies. So we personalize this story. We mentioned several times our medical collaborator, so a female professor for neurology, and a fictitious patient. So it is not a real patient, but it has, an image, a face, and it is shown several times. I mentioned already that we adapted Campbell's hero journey in order to structure our narration. So it starts with the normal life. The patient experiences symptoms. He meets the physicians, even several times actually. Certain tests are carried out until there is a diagnosis. And then there is a little bit the peak in the sense of the tension arc. Some treatment is carried out, and there is a certain outcome and prognosis, so the patient can return somehow. You see, based on the labels that we used here, that this patient hero story can be applied quite generally. It is not specific to the small vessel disease. That was just our example. We try to come up with something that's reusable and can be applied much more often. That was work from Sarah Mitten and Zwei. So here are a few screenshots of her story. It's again a PowerPoint slide. You see that we frequently use these pictographs in order to show the frequency of symptoms. For example, these abbreviations here stand for the two types of the small vessel disease. So we could not really get along and avoid these abbreviations, although that is somehow an obstacle for reaching broad audiences. So here is our fictive patient. Here you see that we combine a 3D visualization with a 2D visualization. I think that can be done in order to explain what can be seen in a cross-sectional slice. This is one optional slide in our elastic structure, so it's not completely linear. In this optional slide, if the user is interested, he gets a short explanation of magnetic resonance imaging. And here is another slide, and that's quite important because that's actually the key message. Untreated high blood pressure is the trigger for the two types of the cerebral small vessel disease. And therefore, that is explained here in one of the slides. You may ask, what is the computer science research here? I think computer science research is not to make many individual case studies for narrative medical visualization, but the computer science contribution, the computer science research contribution here should be to identify reusable components. In the paper of Monique, that I do not comment here a lot because it will be introduced in 2 days at the VCBM workshop, a basic template structure for communicating diseases is developed, and one could imagine also a basic template for communicating novel treatment strategies. The patient hero's journey as adaptation of Campbell's hero's journey is something that is reusable. Also, the idea of using pictographs of women and men to convey the frequency of risk factors, the incidence of a disease, and the prognosis, that is also reusable. And then we also aim at reusable software components, for example, to interact with 3D data in a very restricted manner, for labeling 3D visualizations automatically, for creating figure captions. That would be a natural language generation effort, or for creating a certain type of animations. I often discussed with physicians how a good animation would look like. And they basically had the same scenario. It would be nice to start with an overview. Then it would be good if we fly close to a pathology, an aneurysm, a tumor, a narrowing, and then fade out to another anatomical structure that may be important, highlight the pathology, maybe add some textual information with respect to the subtype or with respect to the size, the diameter, and the volume. Yeah. So reusable animations could also be a contribution from our community. In conclusion, narrative medical visualization aims at increasing health literacy. Yeah. We aim at a target audience without deep medical knowledge and little familiarity also with advanced visualization techniques. Narrative medical visualization benefits from integrating physicians or other healthcare providers. I think in our community, we are sometimes too strongly focused on physicians. These are not the only persons important for giving care to patients. Patients are also important here, medical artists and illustrators and interaction designers. So I'm really happy that in our collaboration with the University of Bergen, we finally had a team involving medical illustrators and interaction designers. I focused here on interactive genres. It could also be possible to think a lot more carefully on creating medical animations. Yeah. And on YouTube, you find a number of examples that also include 3D animations and explain some health-related issues. Our interaction designer always makes us aware of the limited attention span of a broad audience. Yeah, so the average user time is probably below 50 minutes. When we thought about our stories, we always had too much material. It would be easy to create something where the audience would need at least 30 to 40 minutes to look at everything. Yeah, but that is probably too long. You really need to select and focus. Yeah, and once more, in research, computer science research, we should focus on reusable components. The vision that we have in Magdeburg is to have something like a medical story generator, yeah, where the author provides some input, makes some choices, provides some data, and then many things can be suggested by the story generator. Also, the story generator may help to translate a story that was created for one setting, synchronous, for example, to an asynchronous setting, or for one display device to another one. Yeah, it should not happen that a completely new story for the same topic needs to be generated from scratch, but there reuse is particularly important. I want to briefly announce 2 talks at the VCBM workshop that starts on Wednesday in Vienna. Both talks are given by Monique. One is about a case study for narrative medical visualization that we entitled, "Is there a tornado in Alex's blood flow?" Let me briefly explain this strange title. In this story, it is explained how blood flow data can be used to convey to patients that they have a severe disease that needs to be treated, for example, a valve disease, yeah, heart valve disease. And we asked the physician, how do you explain this to patients? And he said, I explained to them, the flow in your aorta is a little bit like a tornado, yeah? And you know, a tornado is something dangerous. We have to do something against it, yeah? So this metaphor, I would say, is used here to explain pathology. Yeah, and again, it is a kind of slideshow that is created, and we have structured it here according to the Freitags pyramid. And that is the second paper that is a bit more general, appeared in Computers and Graphics and was invited to be presented at VCBM. Yeah, you see here that we use again these pictographs quite extensively. We use 3 examples: liver cancer, aneurysms, and I forgot the third one that was provided by Nuska, that are used in order to convey some initial ideas that should be general enough to be used for a broad variety of medical narrative visualization stories. Yeah, let me briefly look at the references that I have used in order to prepare this talk. I have emphasized a few of them. I really appreciate this effort of a large team here that you see led by Benjamin Bach on establishing narrative design patterns for data-driven storytelling. That is really useful. I also appreciate this early paper of Quan Liu Ma and others on scientific storytelling using visualization that appeared in CG&A. Yeah, and of course, it is so important to read the pioneering work from Siegel and Hare on narrative visualization. Maybe it's also useful to emphasize a little bit this short paper here. You see it's only 3 pages, Medical Graphic Narratives to Improve Patient Comprehension and Pre-Procedural Anxiety Before Coronary Angiography. That is this paper from Anna Brandt, where she introduced the data comics that are used routinely at Charité to prepare patients. Yeah, with this, I'm at the end of what I have prepared, and I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Perfect, Bernhard. Thank you. Thank you very much for this great talk. And it's time for questions. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks very much for the wonderful presentation, first hand. And my question would be, in this narrative medical visualization, it would be meant to augment the conversation between the physiologist and the patient, yes?
The physician and the patient.
Okay.
Yeah, a medical doctor. But not only this, I also think of things that can be used at the long night of the sciences, in TV, on YouTube. Yeah, whatever you want to do to convey this. For example, our cooperation partner at the Heart Center Leipzig tells us, Bernhard, you know, we are a commercial hospital, yeah, belonging to a certain concern. What we want to have is a large table in the foyer of our hospital, where it is nicely explained what is our research specialty, what we can do particularly well in order to attract patients. Yeah, that is their motivation, just as an example.
Well, there might be actually a very key component that may not be able to be, under quotes, erased from said discussion, mainly the human component, because it would make sense that some patients would feel more assured to be talking to a real-life person rather than a visualization.
Yeah, that should not explain, and that would also not be legally allowed to replace the doctor-patient communication before a surgery. Yeah, that is not what should happen. But it would be ideal if the patient is better prepared. Yeah, knows about some variants, for example, knows about the risk of the different procedures that are taken into account. Yeah, so the goal is here to have a more effective doctor-patient communication after the preparation with the data comics, for example.
And regarding the martini glass structure, did I understand correctly that after some point, which may be the present day point of the said patient, it would be basically choose your own story and see where each step and action may lead you forward? Yeah,
that fits quite well. Yeah, that is a little bit strange. I remember a discussion with Helwig who called this a narrative paradox, because when you allow the user to more or less freely explore something, as an author, you have no longer control about what he is doing and in which sequence. So the narrative, somehow it is not clear whether it is really conveyed. Yeah. Therefore, I would say at least in the beginning, there should be a lot of guided linear interaction, and probably this first part, this narrow linear part, is larger than the part where you can explore at the end.
Thanks a lot.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for great questions as well. So
Yeah.
are there any questions here? I can see over there. And we are having 3 more on Discord. So
I would have a question about how to, I don't know, how is used in the in this kind of narrative visualization, the scientific difference, for example, between the correlation and the causality, as you mentioned, because from what you have explained, as I have understood it correctly, there is also need of some type of abstraction, some type of generalization that happens something. And recently in the COVID era, there have been a research in many fields that was differing, and then new stuff came around, for example, around the vaccination. And yeah, so how is dealt with this kind of stuff?
I'm not sure whether I understood your question correctly, but it triggers some thoughts in me. The difference between correlation and causality is quite important, and it would be really a useful activity, I think, if a narrative medical visualization is designed in such a way that it explains this difference and that it gives examples for really causal effects, but also maybe examples for where something is strongly correlated, but not causally related. Yeah, so that one could educate patients about basically being careful about correlations, even if they are strong. Yeah, you don't know whether there isn't a hidden third variable that actually causes the effect and not the two that are displayed in a kind of scatter plot. That would be actually quite useful. We are currently thinking about one story with our partners in epidemiology who have really large health data and where such correlations and causal effects really play an important role. So there, this would be really a useful component.
Yeah,
Okay,
happy with it. Okay, thank you. Bernhard, we are having questions online. One of them is from Nuska. She's first congratulating for the great lecture.
Okay.
And she has a question. There is a lot of medical misinformation online, for example, about vaccination. Do you think a narrative medical visualization could play a role to counter this?
Yeah, I really think so. Also based on a number of discussions that I had with Monique. Monique prepared a grant application, a quite large grant application, and uses this as a major motivating example, to improve the health literacy, given that there is so much misinformation, with as reliable as possible high quality information presented in an attractive and engaging manner. So there is, of course, always a certain risk that in order to make something attractive and engaging, you need to a certain extent to simplify, but not to simplify too much. Yeah, that was discussed quite well at one Dachstuhl workshop, and the book that appeared from this, from Anders Jünnermann, Michael Böttinger, and a few others, this trade-off between scientific credibility and sufficient simplification for reaching broad audiences.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. We are having a second question from Alexander Gao. Can immersive technologies like AR, VR be a supportive tool for narrative medical visualization and bring the message even closer and more effectively to the patient?
That is a really good question. A question I always thought about several times, because virtual reality is another research focus in our group. So it would be so nice if we can combine these two. I'm not quite sure. I know that some people work in this direction, and I even discussed this with Benjamin Bach, who is interested in doing this on the one hand. On the other hand, I think at the core of virtual reality is that as a user, I have a lot of freedom. I can look wherever I want. My head is tracked and I see the appropriate visualizations. So as an author of something that is perceived in virtual reality, I have not so much control about what is actually seen and perceived. And that is a bit at odds with the goal of narrative visualization, where the author has his intent and wants to ensure that this is really communicated. Yeah. So I would not say it is that does not make sense. Yeah. If smart people like Benjamin Bach really think about this, then there is probably a good reason. But for me, it is currently not clear how it can be combined successfully. But research in this direction is really something I would say is welcome and relevant.
Yeah, it looks like it's a very promising direction. Let's hope that it is in the end. Mm-hmm. And the third question from Shukai is, are there any standardization efforts in the area of narrative medical visualization? I know some organizations use 3D PDF, but there is no standard, I believe.
No, I would say narrative medical visualization is too young. I found many examples on the internet where companies are doing something. So they internally probably have some style guides, I would say, how they make a story at the New York Times, for example. Probably they even have some tools that they use frequently. But since these are companies, that is not something that you can easily read about. Yeah, that's not accessible. In science, we need to collect more examples to gain experience, and then we get in a situation where we can think about some standardization.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Last chance for questions here. Okay, there is still one. Mm-hmm.
With storytelling and COVID, for example, you showed a couple of examples there, and I'm curious, there are many people who try to like take informations and interpret other things in there to further give proof to their own agenda, for example, like looking at groups that are against vaccination, for example. And do you look at the stories also from a perspective of what could be interpreted in there and how it could be conveyed the same information, but in a sense that there's not much of a malicious attack possible?
Acoustically, I could not follow each and every word, but I think I got the major question, and that is really a good one. How are these stories perceived? Would there be variants that would be more effective, maybe even shorter variants of the same information that have a similar effects? Yeah, these are all really good questions. Also questions that are very similar to what the reviewers ask us when we submit a paper on narrative medical visualization. Yeah, how can you be sure that this is the best way to convey it? Haven't you tested many other alternatives? That is really something that is crucial. I'm not aware of any papers, anything that I can read about that this was done, for example, for the articles that I have seen. Perhaps the news companies themselves are doing something like this internally, but yeah, that is probably not available. But these are exactly the questions that are important.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks once again to Bernhard for a great talk and great discussion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm-hmm. It was a pleasure. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much that you joined us today. It was really an honor. And have a nice rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernhard.
Bye.